I'm so happy to live in a society where gay people have equal rights and are just seen as a normal part of human existence. No, that's not the society we live in. Oh, fork me. As a person who lived through the anime clubs of the early 2000s, I'm definitely no stranger to queer shipping. Back in my day, me and my fellow youths would engage in vigorous debates over the sexuality of Naruto, and we went into battle over whether his accidental kiss with Sasuke meant that they were gay. If you believed it didn't make them secretly gay for each other, then you're nothing but a homophobe and you are out of the club forever, banished for all time.
Shame. Shame. Shame, shame, shame. Shame on you.
And if you did think they were secretly gay for each other, then we found the gay one, everyone! Let's tell her that she's making other bisexual people uncomfortable to come out because of her being so open with her bisexuality. Totally not based on true events. You see, this is just the way things had to be done at the time. Because queer pairings in film and television were so rarely seen, those of us who had any desire to see queerness depicted in our favorite TV shows had to basically create it ourselves through fan art. Because, again, at the time, queerness was so heavily stigmatized.
You know, you really shouldn't say that.
Say what?
Well, say that something's gay when you mean it's bad. It's insulting. What if every time something was bad, everybody said, "Oh, that's so girl wearing a skirt as a top"?
Oh, you are.
Yeah, thank God we've moved so far past that. I recently came across a just really awful video on TikTok. The user in question was discussing queer shipping in fandom and how it's harmful to young viewers, in particularly young boys. She went on to imply that queer shipping pollutes young boys' ability to develop strong male platonic friendships. According to her, this is because queer shipping, especially male-on-male dynamics, implies that all relationships between men are inherently queer in some way. No, I will not be showing this TikTok in this video because that person already deleted it and I don't really want to send them more hate than they've already received. But I do still want to talk about and delve into the hows and whys queer coding and shipping are the way that they are in our current hellscape of a reality. Because harmful as that video is, I can actually see why they may have gotten to some of the conclusions that they got to. But not all. Sharking hell, no, queer shipping is not equal to incest shipping. So let's do it. Let's make a thing of it. Let's talk why is queer coding and queer shipping. Happy Pride, everyone. Let me tell you a story old as time. A new performer comes onto the Hollywood scene. Not only is he funny and talented, but he has a nose for talent in other performers. He discovers the best stars and mentors their careers, and also winds up producing some of the best films of his time. In just a few short years, he solidified himself as a household name and one of the film industry's nicest guys.
I don't get that scene. They go, that's the scene that we wrote to find out whether guys in your job actually read the script. Whatever. And he said, because every studio executive we went to had not, said they had a meeting. Obviously, they read a synopsis that was prepared by somebody, and no one brought that scene up. Or maybe people thought it was a mistake, or no one had read it themselves. They said, you're the only guy who brought it up. You get the movie.
But, as it turns out, that nice guy may not be so nice after all. Out of nowhere, there's a huge controversy with women coming forward and sharing stories of abuse and sexual assault at the hands of said Hollywood star. You may be asking yourself, hey, what does the story of the rise and fall of Harvey Weinstein have to do with queer coding? Well, dear viewers, I'm actually not talking about Harvey Weinstein. No, this story is actually that of a man named Fatty Arbuckle. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was a silent film actor, director, and producer. He mentored Charlie Chaplin and purportedly was the one to have discovered Buster Keaton. Unfortunately, like many success stories in Hollywood, this happy time could not last, and controversy was on the rise. September 5th, 1921, at a luxury party, Fatty Arbuckle would be accused of essaying actress Virginia Rapp, who would tragically lose her life days later from injuries sustained on the night in question. I'm not going to go super into detail about this case, as the details of it are really sketchy and not really relevant to the story here. However, this became a huge scandal, arguably one of Hollywood's first salacious celebrity scandals. Try saying that one 5 times fast. Salacious celebrity scandal, salacious celebrity scandal, salacious celebrity scandal, salacious celebrity... These events, including the unaliving of director William Desmond Taylor, the drug overdose of actor Wallace Reed, and multiple sex scandals involving one Charlie Chaplin, all of this led to people wondering about the media's role in the degradation of societal values. And with the 1915 Supreme Court ruling that films do not actually qualify under First Amendment rights to freedom of speech or freedom of the press, there was also the looming threat of potential government censorship. In response, the industry said,
"No need to censor us. The movie industry shall censor ourselves."
Now again, you may be asking yourself, what the shark does this have to do with queer people? Well, enter William Hayes and the Catholic Legion of Decency. The Hayes Code, created by William H. Hayes, was the rules on what was permissible to be portrayed in a Hollywood film.
The following perversions are hereby banned in Hollywood.
Some of the things that would be considered as a violation of the Hayes Code were things like graphic violence, nudity, and
White slavery, banned. Black slavery is A-OK, though. Switch them out, boys.
But the Hayes Code was not the only rule of law during this time. So if the Hayes Code was the rules on what was permissible to be portrayed in Hollywood cinema, then the Catholic Legion of Decency was the rules on what would be sellable to be portrayed in Hollywood. The Catholic Legion of Decency, otherwise known as National Legion of Decency, was led by prominent influential Catholics and some sympathetic Protestants. Dedicated to policing what was considered acceptable societal behavior, they would influence their religious bases to boycott any films that they considered sinful or immoral, even if they had already passed the Hayes Code. And with the Catholic Church's official opinion that homosexuality is a sin and therefore immoral, depictions of homosexuality were outright banned. You know, along with making fun of the Catholic Church. But that's because they had no sense of humor.
If you're happy and you know it, that's a sin. If you're happy and you know it, that's a sin.
Since the Legion of Decency was so influential on culture at the time, a film's financial success lived or died on whether they thought it was acceptable. The combined influence of both the Hayes Code and the National Legion of Decency meant that censorship was far and wide, and if you happened to violate either of these codes, you could risk being blacklisted by the Hollywood community. This was actually the primary goal during the first implementation of the Hayes Code, blacklisting stars who they considered too sinful or too controversial to be seen by the masses again. Reportedly, studios at the time even kept a Doom Book, which was basically a list of over 150 actors and directors who were considered to be too immoral to work within the industry. Some notable actors who were believed to be on that list were actors like William Keynes, who was blacklisted for being one of the first openly gay actors in Hollywood. Clark Gable was also purportedly on the list at times, with many rumors of having gay encounters with multiple men during the early days of his career. Actor Cary Grant had a suspicious relationship with fellow actor Randolph Scott, with the two living together in an intimate beach house for 12 years. But don't worry, guys, they were roommates.
Two bros chilling in the hot tub, 5 feet apart cause they're not gay.
And of course, the most notable on this list was legendary actress and raging bisexual Tallulah Bankhead, who was blacklisted because along with being bisexual, she also identified as a problem.
She said, "I want to tell you something, dear. Strictly a matter of bone structure." She said, "Talent, because you have the talent. It's a matter of bone structure." At which point I thought, I'll get even with you, you miserable.
With a foul mouth.
You stupid, clumsy son of a... Why don't you look where you're going? I don't know what I am, darling. I've tried several varieties of sex. Going down on a woman gives me a stiff neck. Going down on a man gives me lockjaw. And conventional sex gives me claustrophobia.
There's no actual physical evidence that the Doom book exists, leading most sources to believe that it was actually just several lists that varied from studio to studio. But it did unfortunately have a long-term effect on many careers within the industry. William Haynes quit the business, finding success as an interior decorator. Rumors of Clark Gable's bisexuality followed him for the rest of his career, especially thanks to known actress and gossip Joan Crawford, who basically confirmed that the stories were true. But he managed to salvage his career by ensuring that the rumors stayed just that, rumors, allowing him to maintain status as a huge Hollywood A-lister.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Along with Cary Grant doing the same. Tallulah Bankhead continued to be an ambisextrous woman, as she identified herself. Ambisextrous, I'm totally stealing that.
I don't know Rosie, but I know women. Some of my best friends are women.
She wound up leaving the film industry altogether, luckily finding success in the theater community, where she could live a long and happy life, having multiple affairs with both men and women. Things unfortunately didn't turn out so well, though, for Fatty Arbuckle, the blacklisting that started it all. In the case of Fatty Arbuckle, despite being acquitted 3 separate times in a court of law, court of public opinion won out. Fatty's films were banned and pulled from distribution, and even after his year-long ban was finished, studios were still afraid to work with him, worrying that his name would taint their reputations. Or, worst case scenario, burn down their theaters. Addiction and alcoholism plagued him for years, and just when he was finally beginning to climb back in the film industry's good graces, signing a contract for a major motion picture with Warner Brothers, he tragically died of a heart attack on the very night he signed it. Just to give you an example on how bad this censorship was at the time, say a filmmaker were to violate the Hays Code and have their film banned, any theater that showed said film could face a fine up to $25,000. That's roughly $500,000 in today's time, otherwise known as the amount I spend on Diet Coke every year. Now, to be fair, these fines were rare, and there were films that still were able to release without the approval of the Hays Code. 2 notable examples being Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which was banned for its depictions of homosexuality.
Skipper is the only thing that I got left to believe in, and you are dragging it through the gutter.
No,
you are making it shameful and filthy, you.
And of course, Some Like It Hot, banned for similar reasons.
My thing's straight.
I'll say.
But due to its success, it is also widely considered to have been the film to kill the Hays Code. But in those early days of the budding film industry, filmmaking was still new at the time, and studios didn't have the political or financial power that they do now. I mean, shell, Disney owns most of the modern known world, and yet at the time they were nearing bankruptcy every 3 to 5 business days. Fun fact, a lot of that was because Walt Disney actually paid his animators more than he paid himself. Weirdly noble for Walt Disney. Since no one wanted to risk financial failure or blacklisting, the Hays Code and the National Legion of Decency, their rule was iron law for filmmakers. But the desire to tell queer stories or depict queer characters was still there. So instead, filmmakers found ways of working around the Hays Code by creating a series of subtextual clues for the audience to understand their intentions. This tactic is now what we call queer coding, so named after the Hays Code and its censorship. These characters are heavily implied to be queer, but still have the benefit of the doubt so their films wouldn't be banned or fined. They used clues like lingering look between same-sex characters, a subtle backstory, or makeup and costumes that defied gender norms.
You're a woman?
Why, of course I'm a woman. You thought I was a man?
because anything more explicit than that risked financial failure or worse, potential investigation from the federal government. What's even more tragic about this was that before the implementation of the Hays Code and the iron ruling of the National Legion of Decency, there actually were depictions of queerness in mainstream media. Not a lot, but there were still some. One important film to note would be the Oscar award-winning movie Wings, made in 1927, which is widely considered to portray the first ever on-screen kiss between two men. Even though most of the romance in the film is more subtextual, the act of having an on-screen kiss made it an intrinsically queer relationship. This defiance was a landmark in queer representation, and it wasn't exclusive to just American films either. In the 1920s, filmmakers in Germany released Sex in Chains, Pandora's Box, and Laws of Love, all of which explored openly queer relationships just before the ultimate ban on such portrayals with the rise of fascism.
Sex in Chains in particular has a special place in queer history, as it also deals with the intersectional issues of the mistreatment of incarcerated people and the need for prison reform. Though the story in and of itself is fiction, the scenario is based on the ones found in the book Eros in Prison by former prisoner Karl Plattner. Karl Plattner was a political activist known for his work within the International Communist Party, where they would appropriate money from banks and other wealthy institutions in order to redistribute the wealth and give it back to the poor. His book comprised of his own research from his time in prison, where he would observe the sexual habits of himself and his fellow prisoners and openly discuss topics like homosexuality, among other things that I can't say without getting banned on YouTube. After being transferred from prison to prison due to annoying each of the wardens way too much with his constant demands for prison reform, Plattner was eventually released, and with the help of the Magnus Hirschfield's Institute for Sexual Science, the book was published in order to bring social reform to the ideas of prisoner humanity and same-sex partnership. Unfortunately, with the Nazi rise to power, the Magnus Hirschfield Institute for Sexual Science was raided in 1933, where much of their research and documentation were destroyed. Plattner was arrested by the Nazis and sent to the Buchenwald concentration camp, where he managed to survive the Holocaust, being one of many victims who were liberated by American forces in 1945. Unfortunately, however, on the journey home from the camps, he fell ill and tragically passed before he could make his way back. Plattner was a revolutionary voice in his time, and despite the film Sex in Chains being banned in Germany, copies of it do still remain in circulation to this day, ensuring that in some way, the research done by Plattner and the Magnus Hirschfield Institute for Sexual Science still exists, even with the attempts by authoritarianism to wash it away.
Unfortunately, thanks to that rise of authoritarianism and censorship worldwide, it would be many, many years before we saw openly queer characters in mainstream media again. Films such as The Killing of Sister George in 1968.
And you think you're getting that from Alice? Love and affection?
Well, we've been together for a long time.
Yeah, I know. That wasn't what I asked you.
And The Boys in the Band were among the first to break new ground after the Hays Code ended.
More boring than a queen doing a Judy Garland imitation.
A queen doing a Betty Davis imitation.
Although I would argue that Some Like It Hot was actually the one to break that barrier, because not only did it kill the Hays Code, but you can't tell me that this is a happy hetero ending.
That's good. I'm gonna level with you. We can't get married at all.
Why not?
I'm a man. Well, nobody's perfect.
That's as gay as they come. I did want to highlight and emphasize, though, that queerness has always been in film, and it always will be, no matter how many times they try to censor us out of existence. So now that we've laid all of that groundwork on queer coding, the term relationshipping came about in the 1990s within the fandom for the TV show The X-Files. Fans of the show who wanted main characters Mulder and Scully to be together would identify themselves as relationshippers. and the ones who preferred for the characters to stay completely platonic were identified as no romos. Yes, I hate both of those identifications. Members of the X-Files fandom would spend literal years debating amongst each other about the nature of Scully and Mulder's relationship, analyzing every episode, every stolen glance between the two, reading between the lines of every bit of dialogue they shared. This focus on the potential romance often even wound up overshadowing the main plotline of Supernatural Mysteries. Like, imagine getting your fanbase so hot that they focus more on two imaginary characters kissing than the monstrosities of the frickin' Peacock family.
Mrs. Peacock, they murdered Sheriff Taylor and his wife, and Deputy Pastor.
I can tell you don't have no children. Maybe one day you'll learn the pride, the love.
Like, I've never seen this show, but this image is gonna haunt my nightmares. The creators of The X-Files started to become more aware of how the audience was reacting to the show and the debates that were happening within these online forums, despite these spaces being relatively new at the time. The showrunners and the fans would go on to develop almost a symbiotic relationship, where fans' desires were often incorporated into the show's canon. This was kind of the first example of fan service in mainstream media. At least, you know, in the non-gratuitous nudity sense. And from what I've heard, this participation and listening to their fans actually made the experience better. The fans loved that the writers were listening to them, which encouraged them to engage more with the work, creating one of the strongest internet fan cultures of the 90s and early 2000s. Now, of course, relationshippers did not end with the X-Files, and over the years, the term evolved into the shortened version of shipping, where it would wind up exploding in fan culture with the rise of Tumblr in particular. And, of course, with the rise of fan culture and shipping, there came the rise of the shipping wars. I do not know how many of you were there in the early days of Tumblr, unless you're from the Stone Age like I am, but wow, that place was like the Wild West. You know that meme of someone saying, "I like pancakes," and then someone else responding, "Wow, so you must sharking hate waffles." Yeah, that was the early days of Tumblr shipping. Every show had their own fan base and fan culture, and every fan culture had their own shipping wars. There was, of course, the John Locke debates in the Sherlock fandom, the Bellark in the 100 fandom. I mean, sharking hell, even the Edward versus Jacob debate originated from Tumblr shipping wars.
Bella! Where the hell have you been, Luca?
And then wound up making it into mainstream once Twilight became a mega sensation.
Jacob or Edward? Who says Edward? Haha, see? I told you, it's Edward James Olmos.
And again, because I was there, I was involved in quite a few of these shipping wars myself. Because of course I was. In the Potterhead fandom, before we knew J.K. Rowling was utter garbage, us fans were passing Hermione around like a bong, trying to decide whether she belonged with Ron, or Harry, or Draco.
Malfoy, you okay? Let's go!
That felt good.
In the Twilight fandom, I was obviously Team Edward because I'm garbage.
Did you follow me?
I feel very protective of you.
Even in the Gilmore Girls fandom, there was the Jess, Logan, Dean debate over who Rory should end up with.
Damn it, Gilmore! Give them back their balls!
Team Logan, by the way. It's the only one that makes sense, and I will die on that hill.
You trust me?
In omnia paratus!
You jump, I jump, Jack.
In omnia paratus!
Also, let me know if you want to hear some of my Gilmore Girls thoughts, because I have a bunch of genuinely controversial opinions on that show. The most hottest of takes being that Luke is actually a horrible partner and horrible person.
Then do it. I'm just saying. Let me be part of it.
No.
Why?
The minute you get involved in her life, it'll be all over for me.
Let me know if you want to hear that. And with these shipping wars, sometimes, a lot of times, people were really extreme. I mean, even in the Bleach fandom, author of the manga Tite Kubo purportedly received death threats from fans after the Ichigo and Orihime romance officially became canon. Rukia was right there!
It's a pleasure.
And you cannot convince me that Orihime and Tatsuki are not lesbian lovers.
Orihime, Tatsuki. This time I'll protect you.
I'm a girl's girl and a slut, and even I'm not on my friends like that. And what's even weirder about this phenomenon is that it almost didn't seem weird to everyone. Like, don't get me wrong, I think most of us would say that the death threats to the authors were extreme, and I really don't think most rational people would have done that. But looking back on at least my time within the shipping wars and these fandoms, I found myself having a weird hatred for the other side that I somehow considered utterly justified. Just the fact that someone didn't ship Spike and Buffy together like I did meant that they were worthy of my hate.
I love you.
No, you don't. So thanks for saying it.
I remember being a high school student and having a literal litmus test for girls I would allow myself to be friends with, and the sole question of it being whether they were Team Edward or Team Jacob, because, and I quote, this is a real thing that 14-year-old me said to some poor Team Jacob girl, "I hate Team Jacob people." Like, these shipping wars somehow weren't just fun little fandom debates in our heads. They had actually become legitimate fights that we were having amongst the very people we should have been friends with due to our very apparent common special interests. And the shipping wars that were always the deepest in the trenches were, of course, the queer ships. This isn't something that started with Tumblr either. I mean, in fact, some of the earliest days of fanfiction in general go all the way back to Star Trek in the 1960s with Kirk and Spock fanfiction. Fans have been getting down and dirty with the ships for a long time. I'm pretty sure there's probably some fanfiction from Shakespearean plays back in the day that shipped Macbeth with Macduff. I mean, how many of Shakespeare's plays wound up having a romance between one man and a girl disguised as another man? You're gonna tell me that's not a little bit gay? Like the creators of The X-Files, showrunners were more aware of what their fan bases were talking about and the relationships that they wanted to see. And like The X-Files, they started incorporating these hints as fan service to the people asking for these queer ships. But unlike The X-Files, these fanon ships rarely made their way into the canon. And if they did, it stayed as these little moments where the creators would lean into the sexual tension. This is a technique used by writers known as queerbaiting, where the writers would use these hints at queer relationships in order to boost viewership and discussion amongst fans without actually going all the way with it and thus risk alienating the straight audience, which, just by the sake of not being a minority in the mainstream world, makes up a much larger viewership. This has led to the discussion of terms like comphet, or compulsory heterosexual. This is the idea that the default for every piece of media is to have a canon relationship between a male and a female character, and also the assumption that every character is heterosexual until explicitly stated otherwise. Straight is the default for humans, so therefore it is also the default for fictional characters. That's not backed in science, by the way, and if you want more in-depth explanation of that, check out my video on the film I Saw the TV Glow. A really good example of a critique and satire of comphet within mainstream media is the 2000 film But I'm a Cheerleader.
Honey, we think you're a lesbian.
starring I'm surprised she's not gay, Natasha Lyonne.
I'm a homosexual. I'm a homosexual.
And okay, she's actually gay, Clea Duvall.
You want me to do what I want? Screw you!
If you're in queer spaces, especially as a queer woman, this film is like one of the most common queer awakenings for so many girls.
Everyone reads Cosmo. Everyone looks at other girls all the time.
But you only assume that they're thinking what you're thinking when they look. But they're not.
It tells the story of a teenager who gets sent to a conversion camp where she then discovers that she's gay and winds up falling for her roommate.
5, 6, 7, 8. I want you to be my mate. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're the one that I adore. 5, 6, 7, 8. Don't run from me, 'cause this is fate.
It's really poignant, and I hate that it's still relevant in today's time, but you should absolutely take a look at it. The concept of queer shipping in film and television is not a new one. We've been doing it for decades. You know, like I said, Kirk X Spock fanfiction in the 1960s and 70s. My dad is a Trekkie. I should ask about that. But every once in a while, queer shipping comes back into discussions of how it's affecting our society as a whole, for good or for bad. So, with all of that said, let's get into the nuances of queer shipping and how it both shapes and has been shaped by our society.